because it suddenly shows up and it says that we are live. Hello, everyone. And what the hell even is implementation science? But maybe more importantly, how the hell do we get people to wash their hands? If you're watching this later, hopefully COVID is over. But for everyone right now, COVID is sort of a big issue. And we definitely want to figure out how can we motivate, how can we convince, how can we force people to wash their hands or even adopt other kinds of practices that might be kind of inconvenient. So I have a lot of questions. Luckily, we have a fantastic expert with us. Today, we have Anna Baumann. She is a PhD. She is awesome. She's on Twitter, and she's originally from Brazil, which is cool. She works as an assistant professor at the Brown School of Social Work in Washington University in St. Louis. She's been super busy right now because she is what we call an implementation scientist. And so Dr. Baumann is going to be talking with us about ways that scientists are trying to figure out once we know what people should be doing, how do we actually get them to do that, whether it's hand washing or thinking about things like climate change, all that sort of fun stuff. So, Anna, it's really great to have you. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. How are you?
Good. I am doing really, really well. It's beautiful down here. How long have you been up in St. Louis?
It's going to be about 12 years that we are
Wow,
here. Yeah.
that's awesome. And so how has your work changed in the last, I don't know, couple of months?
I know, right? It's like what time is very subjective right now.
Right.
It has changed a lot. And I think for the field of implementation science, epi, right, stats, we're all trying to figure out how to help people
Hmm.
thinking about evidence-based interventions, thinking about how we can sustain what we should be doing,
Right.
washing hands. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you mentioned epidemiology. How does that tie in? So do you consider yourself an epidemiologist? What's your background?
No, I hang out with the smart people. I am
Oh,
not one of those.
uh,
So I am an implementation scientist, which is it's a field that we are transdisciplinary. So we like to hang out with all sorts of other people, but we are not necessarily epidemiologists.
okay,
If that
okay. And
answers,
is that, I
yeah.
guess, is it more kind of psychology or what is that? How do you study this? Could you give
Yes.
me a little
What
bit
is
of like
it?
the metrics of, I just imagining going out on the street and asking random people if they wash their hands, which is probably not efficient nor what you do. Uh,
It's like, why do you wash your hands? So yeah, so the field of implementation science, and we still don't know what an implementation scientist looks like, right? It's like because I was just it was born maybe 19 years old,
wow,
20 years old ago,
it's a baby.
with the idea, yeah, we're babies. We're still making several things. Um, and it was born with, the idea of we have evidence-based interventions, right? So we know, for example, how to wash hands or the importance of washing hands because if you wash your hands, you're going to kill bugs. We know how I'm a parent interventionist. We know how
Hmm.
to work with parents so they can improve parenting practices so then they can improve, help the kids. We
Hmm.
know how to treat depression.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are all those interventions that we call them evidence-based interventions, and we can talk about how those evidence are born, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is from the moment that you start testing those interventions, that you know they are effective, that they know that they work, to the time where, say, you go to the hospital or you go to school and you actually receive those interventions,
Hmm.
there is a paper in 2000 that was published that showed that it takes about 17 years for 14% of those to reach.
Whoa.
So, yeah, right? So, what that means is that when you go to the doctor, there's maybe 5% of chance that this doctor right now is doing evidence based care. Is that crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense because I mean, in some ways, because I studied microbiology and we did a bunch of stuff with antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, and a lot of times what we would learn in research or what we'd learn in science circles, I would go to the doctor and they'd say, "We don't know what it is. Let's give you an antibiotic," and I was sort of shocked.
Yeah.
So wow, but that is
Yeah.
that's an amazing statistic. So you were saying though
Yeah.
that you're interested in these kind of parent implementations, or doing interventions there. But first, let's talk about what it, you mentioned the evidence-based things. So it sounds like this isn't just
Hmm.
something where you just say, I think this might be useful, let's go tell everyone.
Right. Right.
What are you trying to get across?
Right. Right. What does that mean? Right.
Yeah.
So, well, we're seeing now with COVID vaccine and COVID treatments, right? It's not that you can do just one tiny study, get an effect, and then say, now this works for everybody, right? So we consider an intervention evidence-based intervention when you do a study in a control setting. So for example, say I only recruit specific type of parents and specific type of families for this particular study, and I do X, Y, and Z. Then I replicate that, and I replicate that with more parents now in a different setting.
Okay.
If that intervention is replicated and the fact is replicated in different settings, now I know what the components are,
Hmm.
I know what to do, and then I can say, okay, this is an evidence-based intervention. By doing this, I will improve, say, parenting practices, and then those improve child outcome.
Hmm.
Uh, right? And so now we have several of those, but they are not being implemented in usual care, right? A lot of the therapists, a lot of the people that are working with parents are not necessarily using evidence-based interventions for several reasons. And that's where the field of implementation comes, and that's where the passion comes, right? It's like,
Hmm.
what are the barriers? How can we facilitate implementing those interventions where people need them?
So it sounds like there's the population that you want to actually do these things, but then there's the population of educators. How do you go about figuring out who to even talk to with this stuff?
Ha. Ah. Like, oh boy.
I
So
think
it depends
it's
on.
good to know for people, like people always assume that I prep the guest beforehand,
Right.
but that would take way
No,
too much
you're
work on
not.
my part. So this is just I'm just
Yeah.
interested. So anyway,
I,
curveballs.
you told me you had questions. So it will depend on your question. Again, right? You're a
Yeah.
scientist. It will depend on your question, right? So say that if my research question, there's a number of us that work in school, right? Not me. That say, I would love to see if teachers or school counselors can do right better mental health
Mm.
services. Ah, so that is one question. And the barriers to implementing evidence-based interventions in those settings, in school settings, are different than if I say, for example, I want to reach vulnerable populations or populations that are in underserved communities.
Mhm.
Schools is an option, are an option. Maybe I want to go to churches, right? And the church, and so the settings are very different. My research question will be very different, and the protocol will be very different, right?
Hmm.
And so, what we think in terms of implementation science are how can we facilitate the organizations, be it school, church, hospitals?
Mm.
How can we teach and train and collaborate with the providers and the community,
Mhm.
right? But we also think about, there are a number of us that think about the policy level. Um, how can we then support policy and cost of those interventions so then they're easily implemented and sustained? Because um, it's not just about implementing, right? It's, you don't want to do all this work and then the intervention falls apart, but you want to implement it and make it successful so that it stays and sustains a long time.
Right,
So that's
right.
what we do.
That's so interesting. On I guess the big ones that come up, right, usually are probably like vaccines or climate change. I assume with parental stuff, I mean, that's a tricky group of people to be jumping into. There's a lot of different opinions. And you were also mentioning that there's disparities between these different ethnic, geographic, socioeconomic
Yeah,
groups. How much of those things do you have to keep in mind when you're doing these sort of studies?
a lot, right?
Mm.
So a lot in many ways. One in where you are implementing the intervention,
Mm.
um, right? So where you do your work matters because parents or families that have low resource that don't have resources, right? They're busy working all day. How do you reach them?
Mm-hmm.
What time do you reach them? Where do you post it, right? Where do you implement your intervention matters?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one level. The second level is who is going to do it, right? So I work a lot with Latino populations here in the United States, but also abroad. But I am very conscious about how I look like, how I speak, how I behave, right? The titles that I have. And so, how you engage with the community, who is engaging with the community matters. Uh, and then we talk about the intervention per se, right? So, some interventions are, for example, one of the manuals that we have, and this intervention that I work with was 17 sessions. 17 sessions is fantastic for who has time and resources to to come and spend half an hour and 1 hour, 2 hours with you.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not be feasible for all the families. So that's another level. And then the third level, and I promise I will stop,
No, no,
is
no. I mean, this is all new to me, so.
is how we train people, right? It's
Mm.
like, it's not just about implementing the intervention, but how do you train the providers to implement it?
Right.
Are we doing workshops? Are we doing supervision? How is the supervision being done? How do I check for fidelity?
Yeah.
Because I need to know that the providers are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And so, for example, in the intervention that I work with, we videotape every session, which means that those videos need to be uploaded somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone needs to watch them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this, when we talk about evidence-based intervention, there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be there to support the success of that intervention. And that's what we consider and talk about in implementation science.
This is so cool because I mean, this is some sort of fantastic and data-driven version of science communication, right? It's the foundations of it where you have science, you're trying to communicate it, and past that point, not only are you communicating, but you're trying to change behaviors, ideally of
Right.
very large populations. And so you're saying, you know, there's this kind of huge time lag between when we've kind of settled on, okay, this is what the scientific community believes is generally true or generally helpful, and then implementing it. Can people change their behaviors in 2 to 5 years? Does this have to be a generational thing?
No, we can. We're humans. We're fantastic. We learn things, right? And I think COVID now with the pandemic, we're all learning that we can change,
Yeah.
right? Suddenly we're all providing services online. Suddenly we're all at home. Um, suddenly we're all at home. Suddenly now I'm homeschooling, and
Oh
right?
gosh. Oh, more power to you. I have the most respect for anyone who is keeping themselves upright and children because I can barely remember to eat breakfast for me. But no, congratulations and thank you for your service to humans.
Well, to humans.
Ah,
Thank you. I appreciate all the
yes.
parents, all the givers. Yeah. Well, the benefit of it is that when they're here, right? Because so we have, I'm divorced, and when they're with their dad, it's exactly like that. It's like I forgot to eat lunch, but when they're here, they remind you that you have to.
There you go. All right. So I want to make sure, because otherwise I'm just going to ask you all the questions. I want to make sure that we get to some of these questions that we got from Instagram. Um, oh, awesome. This is so cool. So let's see. We've got one from, wow, okay. We've got one from Adri Caro HM on Instagram saying, data is clearly not enough. How can we appeal to the sensitivity and rebuke their kind of current post? How do we integrate what scientists say, okay, this is true, versus getting it to matter?
Oh boy, people.
In 3 words. Just kidding. Uh,
This is why we have people like Susanna, right? So here's the thing: we scientists, we don't know how to talk,
Mm.
right? We learn our own language. We were just having this conversation. It's really hard to talk science, and there's the whole science about how to talk about science, which is a whole nother. Um, and so there is actually in the field of implementation science, right? Some people thinking about policy and studying how to communicate with policymakers, for example, right? Who are actually eager to hear about science.
Right.
uh, So
Wait,
there's a
okay,
whole
wait.
science.
I'm
Yeah,
actually
go ahead.
surprised by this. Are policymakers actually interested in learning the science?
They're not that bad people.
Oh, okay.
They
No,
might
I know that sounded like a leading question, but I mean, I've never
I
worked
yeah.
in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I will we can tag later on like the names of the people who are studying those things. There's
Yeah.
not me, but they're amazing people studying how how to talk with politics and what kind of language to use and right. It's like
Yeah.
how to develop your briefs and have those conversations. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Huh.
There's a science behind that.
That's really
We
cool.
should invite you should invite them over. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would love to. If anyone's who's listening to the chat right now, if you know somebody that that does that stuff, I'm amazed. I think I kind of have I've maybe been in academia too long and have a very biased view of the world. Um, but kind of going
Yeah.
along with that, so we've got a couple questions from Science Sam, Samantha Yamin, from Instagram, saying, is this something we're really like we're trying to do as far as getting people to wash their hands, and also like what place does rhetoric have in science and psychom? I think that really ties back to
Yeah.
that last question of does it matter how we say it, or is it just let's give them the information and they should figure it out?
It does matter how we say it. The information is not enough, right?
Hmm.
So I love the example of hand washing because it's so close to all of us, right? So
Hmm.
ah, to give a very clear example, I have a 6-year old,
Hmm.
and so right, I would be sitting here, and then he would go and say, I don't know, like, son, go wash your hands because it's dinner time,
Hmm.
and he would go, and then he would come back,
Hmm.
and I would ask, did you wash your hands? And he would say yes, and then I would ask, did you use soap?
Hmm.
And then he would look at me, and this is true. He
Hmm.
would look at me and say, hold a second. And then he will go back and come
Oh,
back
oh.
and say, did you wash your hands? Yes. Did you use soap? Yes. Did you rub your hands? And
Ah.
hold a second. And then he would come back. And so, right? And so it's hand washing, which would all, and he knows clearly because he's coming back and forth, right?
Right.
We know that we, so we need resources. We need something liquid and we need something, right, to kill the bugs.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's the resource situation, but we also need skills, right? It's not just putting the hand and the soap and then doing this,
Hmm.
right? You need, and now we've learned that you need to wash your hands and do all sorts of procedures. And so how you talk and how you teach and how you sell the evidence-based intervention, in this
Hmm.
case, hand washing,
Hmm.
matters, right?
Hmm.
Because it's not just me saying you need soap and water.
Hmm.
It's me saying you need soap and water. You need to rub your hands for now. We have songs all over the Twitter. You need to rub your hands for 10 seconds. And so it right.
Yep.
And so it's learning how to do all those skills and learning how to train somebody so the 6-year old doesn't come back for 3, 4 times saying, yes, I've washed my hands. True story.
I believe that. I mean, I'm just kids are such an interesting insight into just how humans think and behave because I mean, I think we've all had practices like flossing. I'll use flossing. I know I should floss. I brush my teeth twice a day. Um,
Right.
and I maybe floss once a week. Like that's usually about as good as it
Right.
gets. And I think that there's one thing to know something is good for you. There's another to actually have it become a behavior.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
how do you, especially with these things that are very, they're very personal. Hopefully flossing isn't polarizing. But things like, I mean, I don't know. I probably, now I'm going to get a bunch of,
Now the tension's gonna come. Yeah.
um, but like, parenting, that's a very polarizing topic. No matter what you say with parenting, someone's going to tell you you're wrong. Um,
Yeah.
how do you navigate getting people to change their behaviors? And some of the questions that I've gotten both on Twitter and Instagram are people asking, how can we, Kelly Raptor says, how can we get people to fact check and be thoughtful rather than reactive? And I've had other questions from people saying, how do we do this without making people hate the messenger, especially when it's behavioral, it's so personal.
Right. Right. Hi, so many hard questions. So, um, if we like if we think about parenting practices, right, which I think you're right, it's full of values,
Yeah.
right? But somewhere in there we have common values, right?
Right.
A parent wants to do good, I'm assuming,
Mm.
um, to his or her child,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The process by which he or she does that could be potentially questionable,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it depends a lot on the interventions. The intervention that I work with, we do a lot of role playing.
Hmm.
It's a lot of showing. So I do the modeling, and I actually use the parent as a tool and say, so
Mm-hmm.
how would it look like, for example, if I start screaming at you, right?
Um,
And then so we enhance that behavior so the person can have the experience of that effect,
mm.
and then we model the correct way, we debrief, right? There's a lot of skills and technical skills to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's at the level of the intervention.
Yeah.
Me as a therapist working as a parent with a parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
At
Mm-hmm.
the level of public health, right? Let's hand wash. Um, there it's a multiple level, right? It's how do we put systems in place for fact checking?
Mm-hmm.
So we have things like audit and feedback. So for example, if I were to train a therapist on doing X intervention,
Mm-hmm.
I might say, you're doing X things really good. Now, how about you do Y? I might, depending if I am a leader at the organization, depending on the behavior, I might put in an average, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are, we have this goal. We are 60% there. Let's
Mm-hmm.
keep going,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, we all like feedback. We're humans,
Mm.
right? I like to know whether I'm going left or right. And
Yeah.
so it's using those behavioral techniques at the organizational level, practitioner level, national level, so we know what we're doing to give us guidance, right? And
Yeah.
and there are, we call it labels,
Mm.
Hive. I'm sorry.
Mm.
Implementation strategies, right? That we can use to delineate and to provide guidance for the behaviors, so we can, I don't know, achieve the goal.
Sure.
Put it this way.
Huh. Wow, that's a lot of different things to be checking. So, and just I don't know that I've asked you directly. So, what is your current intervention that you're working on, or do you have several? Are there? I don't know how any of this works. Wow.
So I am. I love my job, and part of what I do is I am I work at the university providing consultation as an implementation scientist to several people.
Okay.
So what that means is I am a parent interventionist on Generation PMTO, which is intervention that I work with. There are several other fantastic parent interventions, but I also hang out with several other uh, PIs or I don't know, collaborators in different things. So, for example, today in the morning I was working on a project around hypertension. Tonight I'm going to work on a project on sickle cell. Uh, I don't know. Tomorrow I'm going to work on another project on cancer,
Hmm.
breast cancer,
Wow.
HIV, and so it's bringing. That's one of the fantastic things about implementation science is that it's a science that's so team focused
Hmm.
that I bring those lenses that are multi-level lenses. Right? It's like at the patient and the provider organizational level, and I think able to navigate those different focuses in different areas. Um,
I am
it's a lot of fun.
absolutely sure you are, especially in new fields. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it's such an emerging place, and it's an emerging field of science, but then also you're combating these like really entrenched beliefs. One of the questions that we
Yeah.
got on Twitter and kind of mentioned before our chat from Liesl Krauss was, is hive mind a thing, and what is hive mind? I've definitely heard this, and people usually use it as an insult or something. What is
Oh
this?
boy. Yeah. So I will confess. So I will confess that I'm not from here, right? We were talking about from Brazil, and so often those languages I have to double check. It's like, what does this mean? So yesterday was like, oh. So if I conceptualize the hive mind means that we have a specific language and it's really hard sometimes to understand. Yes, we
Yeah, so there's
unfortunately.
that, and then there's also the kind of hive mind as like kind of everyone decides. right? We've all decided that we're bees, and we have all decided that, we all want this specific flower, and people really can't diverge from that, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I guess it's sort of this question of, if you have a community, how do you change the opinions of a community? Is it, can you just start at a couple people and hope it infiltrates? Or if this is the minority opinion, if 90% of your population says, no, I'm doing it this way, and you're teaching some subset of that, how do you actually get that to spread instead of just being tamped down by this general opinion?
Right. We are this.
Hmm.
We, I, so bringing science, right?
Yeah.
You have to find your champions.
Mm.
And your champions might be not necessarily the ones who are at the top,
Hmm.
right? The label ones, the ones that everybody identify. But if you think about, and now bringing the social dynamic, right? The champions that might be willing to change,
Hmm.
right? Some people that are open for different platforms, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, and collaborate and team and engage with the science, right?
Hmm.
So identify your champions.
Mm.
There are
Hmm.
tons.
And I'm guessing,
Um,
going back to that, the point about how different communities need different things, communicate differently. Um, do you need to have champions in those specific communities? Is it enough to just have, like, I'm a middle class cis white woman. I would guess that I should not be speaking to every single community.
huh. Uh, it's a yes and no. I think it depends on what is it that you want to speak and how you
Mm,
speak.
interesting.
Um, so as a right,
Hmm.
a middle class cis women,
Hmm.
I think we also have a lot of power to use that privilege
Hmm.
and engage and support the communities, or other communities, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you cannot speak for them, but you can speak with them,
Hmm.
right? And use your power to support those who actually need.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I don't know that I've heard it said that way, of don't speak for them, but speak with them, and yeah, use
Yeah,
that privilege. Absolutely. Um,
yeah.
let's see. Uh, Interesting. Question from Authentically Average says, how do you balance, quote, this is a good idea, with, quote, this is overbearing or overreach? And I kind of interpret that as, how do you decide how much to implement? I'm assuming you don't just say all of your parenting is bad. Here's a book. Um,
Right.
I would guess.
Go read.
Go read.
Ah.
Woof.
I don't. I wonder if this is in terms of science, in terms of study, in terms of implementing an evidence-based intervention. My mind goes so many ways.
Let's think of it in terms of it, how how much of the science do you try to get across in one set of
Mhm.
interventions, I suppose.
Right, right. Ah, what I love about, um, I think the simpler is the best,
Okay.
right? And so if you think about hand washing,
Hmm.
let's go about hand washing, right? If hand washing soap, it's such a simple behavior,
Yeah.
right? We supposedly all have learned, a number of us, I'm not going to say ever all, a number of us have learned how to hand wash when we were little ones,
Hmm.
at least a 6 year old, right?
Hmm.
Fast forward, we're still talking about what it means to hand wash.
Yeah.
And hand washing is such a simple thing, right? It's
Hmm.
like it takes 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Hmm.
So if you think about that as an example, and you add, say, lifestyles interventions, big interventions where it entails you to exercise, to work, to journal, to eat, and to do all sorts of things,
Hmm.
imagine how challenging that is,
Right.
right? And so when you think about how much is too much, I think every time it will be too much.
Yeah.
The problem is not it's whether it's too much or not, I guess. It's also how do you sustain that intensity
Mm.
um, in the long term,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you're not like my son coming back and forth. I'm like, I need to.
I mean, yeah, I do not have kids of my own. I love babysitting. I've gotten the pleasure to do that a lot, and it is, the best part about babysitting is that you do get to go home. You don't have to keep pushing against that wall of energy that is a child. And I would imagine, it's one thing to be asking adults to wash their hands, but it's got to be difficult to be getting adults to change their behaviors with kids because it's a constant back pressure. How often do you have to kind of go and do these re-interventions or these, reintroductions? Is it a constant focus on one community? Is it enough to do like one workshop and just put it out there?
No. So it depends on the interventions, right? So some interventions are more intense,
Mm,
other interventions are less intense.
mm,
It will also depend on what you want to target, right? So if I want to just increase knowledge about, say, the importance of praise, for example,
mhm.
you should praise people because I like to be praised, you like to
Yeah.
be praised, why not praise your child, right?
Yeah.
If that is your goal, then you don't, like, once in a while you go and you provide flyers, that's enough. But
Mm,
if your goal is to change behavior and actually provide right skills,
right.
then your intervention should be longer. You should have some way of measuring it, and then you
Mm,
should have perhaps some follow-up, some boosters, right?
mm,
Because life happens.
mhm,
um,
mhm.
and right, we were just talking about flossing and hand washing. I don't know, we forget because that's who we are.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Uh,
Yeah, and I mean, like you were saying, it's a minor inconvenience to wash your hands. It takes 10 seconds, but we do only have so much time in the day. If we were trying to do every single thing that people said was healthy for it, I've read something that we're supposed to like wash our sheets every 4 days, and that's never going
right.
to happen. Mm-mm.
Right.
And that's how I feel every time I pick up a women's magazine too, where they're like, just take these 57 easy steps. Um, and your
You're
legs
like,
will look better. Uh,
right.
so,
Right.
but the chat
You
going
go,
on
somebody's doing it.
in our video is going pretty well. So we've got Alex Samara says it must be tough to gather data and control for so many variables in these kinds of studies, especially when looking at things that take years to show efficacy. Yeah, I mean, what timetables are you working at to show that this matters?
Yeah, yeah, we love mess. uh it's funny because we were just having this conversation with a clinical trialist, right? And where everything's controlled, and it's like, don't vary. I
Yeah.
was like, no, it's okay, let it vary just a little bit. um Yeah, so we get, it like, of course we're scientists, so it depends on your research questions. Uh,
Yeah.
but we have some metrics, say for example reach, right?
Hmm.
So we were just talking about who and where do you want to talk to. So reach is a classic. It's one of the measures, for example, right? It's like from the total number of, say, the parents or the kids that go to this school,
Uh-huh.
right? How
Uh-huh.
many of those have we reached? Have we tried to engage in the intervention? Of those, how many are part of the intervention? Of those, how many actually completed the intervention,
Yeah.
right? So we have some metrics that are, I don't know, easier, if I can think about
More of like
saying.
a binary of like yes or no or like how
Right,
many.
right. Administrative log, but then we can have a whole nother conversation of who is trick capping those logs.
Oof.
And then we also have, right, things about asking, like, surveys in terms of asking whether the intervention is useful, is feasible, is acceptable. And then of course we do semi-structured interviews, focus groups, right? And sit down and talk with people because we love to talk with people.
I'm impressed. I purposely did not choose to study humans because I mean the reporting errors, no. But we have a question from Austin. Oh, I always say this name wrong, this last name. Nguyen. It says, what is your opinion on how to effectively convey statistics, especially with the flood of what one would consider bad or incorrect stats floating around? Um, how do you take these stats that say, you've got a 2.3% chance of increasing X if you do these things? How do you make them accessible or interesting?
We come and hang out with Susanna and talk. That's what we do. We need we it's right. We don't know how to talk with people.
Yeah.
We Yeah, yeah. So we should invite all of those scientists to your chat.
I love that you talk about that you've been modeling these things. And I think that one of the things that we see that's a problem in science communication is talking to people. But
Mhm.
it's, if you get a chance to act something out, it's the same way as like listening to a lecture versus writing notes down during it.
Right,
Um,
right.
doing these modeling things, is that something that's kind of common in the field of having people do like a workshop, or is this, are you mostly based on pamphlets or I don't know, webinars, internet, the world? I guess it's kind of different now, though. Wow. Woof.
Twitter. We're a bunch of us are in the Tweetland. So uh, we should be feeding back, right, what we learn to the community, because it's like the science of implementation science. So you have this intervention. Let's see if it works.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's unclear to me how successful we're doing this.
Huh.
And there are a number of my friends and colleagues talking about actually the gap of implementation science and implementation practice, right?
Yeah.
Because of exactly the hive mind, right? We're getting so engaged and entrenched in our science that we're forgetting to bridge the gap with the
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there are a couple of people who are being more thoughtful about, for example, bringing those who are in practice, so practitioners, intermediaries, so people that are actually doing the studies or the interventions that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
bringing them to our conferences
Mm-hmm.
and having them present to us,
Mm-hmm.
forcing us as a scientist to cope. For, Forcing is not, it's a very strong word,
Mm-hmm.
but it is, right, forcing us to think about how we communicate our scientific findings so we can collaborate with the community and not have, right, us
Yeah.
talking our journals and papers and then forgetting about those who actually did the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, and so there are ways that some people are doing, right, and so bringing them to conferences, co-creating,
Mm.
co-writing projects, co co-proposing, so
Mm.
for funders,
Mm.
right, so having community voice at the forefront.
Yeah.
um, but I do think there's a lot to learn still.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, I really appreciate that, though. I think it's oftentimes hard to get scientists to talk about how much we don't know yet, and I mean, that's why I've been enjoying these talks so far, is that people are much more willing to just say, yeah, it's super interesting. I wish we knew more. That's what we're trying to do right now. And on that note,
Right.
because I've already taken up more time than I said I would, because this is cool. Gosh, I can't imagine if I was just like, I'm just going to talk with people as long as I want to. We'd be here all day. But usually the question I like to ask people at the end is, in this topic, what are you interested in learning? What are you looking up? What are you Googling? What are you like hoping the field goes towards in the future? What do you want to
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm. Whew.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things that I have been trying to learn,
Hmm.
because I don't think I'm good at all, is and you touched on the disparities, right?
Hmm.
So the field of implementation science was born to push, right, evidence-based interventions to the community.
Hmm.
And what often is happening is that we're also forgetting about the, those communities who are in undersourced and
Mm.
vulnerable contexts,
Hmm.
because the challenges there are even higher, right? We're seeing it now. And so we've been, in a number of us, it's not just me, a number of us have been trying to think carefully about what does it mean to reach populations who are really in need.
Mm.
How does that look like? And what kind of metrics, what kind of strategies are unique for those populations, right?
Yeah.
Both here, but also in low resource settings, because a number of the measures, a number of the frameworks, a number of the designs were born here, right?
Mm.
Which is
Hmm.
okay, it's absolutely fine.
Right.
But then when we take it, say, when I take it to low resource settings, they just don't really, really match. And
Sure.
so I'm very passionate about testing the boundaries of what we know,
Yeah.
um, to the communities that are in vulnerable context.
Right. I mean, that makes a ton of sense, and it's yeah, you can't just pick up the pamphlets and take it to the new place and say, "Hey, go do these things." If they don't have the resources to do them, or if they use a different kind of system or whatever, and yeah, that focus on the people who really need it the most, I think that's just really, really important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously, there's a ton of questions we did not get to, but you have your Twitter contact information underneath you there. Are you
Mhm.
comfortable with people kind of tweeting at you,
Yeah,
asking questions?
absolutely.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I just keep tweeting at you?
Oh my God, I don't. Yeah, I might not know the answer. So can I say I don't know?
That's
Yeah, no,
fine.
absolutely. And then,
Yeah,
yes, and then we'll talk to the other fantastic people in the field. Yeah,
yeah. Oh,
yeah,
well, Anna, sorry. Whew.
it's
Thank
okay.
you so much for taking the time. This is really cool. Definitely going to be keeping track of the work that you do, and yeah, good luck because that, especially now, is it's a changing system. But thank you again so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Okay, everyone, thank you again so much for watching. A lot of you stayed around for a long time, which that feels good. If you want to make me feel even better, go ahead and click like and subscribe. It says that I should keep going even as things get busier and busier. But also let me know who I should be talking to. Drop those in the comments on this video. Go ahead and check out my socials if you would like to. But yeah, until next time, think about how you speak, how you convey things, maybe how we could be doing it better, or even how I could be doing it better. We're all learning, we're all figuring out what's happening. So, bye.